think this obsession with data that modern society has is not necessarily a negative infatuation, as I do think statistics play a pivotal role in analyzing data and for understanding the more significant social issues behind said figures. However, as Filer notes in his New York Times article, we are awash in numbers. Data is everywhere, and old-fashioned things like words are in retreat, and numbers are on the rise. Unquantifiable arenas like history, literature, religion, and the arts are all receding from public life, replaced by technology, statistics, science, and math. Namely, it really seems as though necessary, substantive information is lost in this fixation of raw data. We really must take a step back and look at the bigger picture for instances that require contextual relevance, precisely, the issue of human rights. I'm not really arguing to ignore statistics completely. As I mentioned before, I do think statistics play a vital role in laying the framework for ethical issues, but solely fixating on this data is not pragmatic. As Mr. Watts in the United States of Metrics notes, I guarantee all you're going to get is confused. There are thousands of studies out there and they're all contradictory. Instead, eat reasonable food, exercise, and get a good night's sleep. After all, you might get hit by a bus tomorrow. Of course, diet takes only one form of these many obsessions of metrics. But while statistics help create a visualization of issues when facing socio-political and ethical issues, people should really view data as part of a larger vehicle for solving problems rather than the actual vehicle itself. When it comes to discussing ethical issues, we really must understand that people are not merely numbers. We're complex beings that all have our own life experiences, families, friends, tribulations, emotions, etc. Thus, our issues are also going to be correspondingly multifarious, based on extreme relativism, driven by emotional judgments, aspects that numbers cannot substantially represent. Most importantly, there is no underlying essence either in humanity, other than us being collectively human or homo sacer. We are no different from one another based on the color of our skin, our sexual orientation, or where we were born. And if there is no essence and we are all empty, we should all be entitled to essential human rights. We impose our reality onto the world, but there really is nothing more than mere convention. But also, we can't really ignore conventional institutions, namely politics. But we can understand this juxtaposition of natural rights to political rights. This imposition subsequently results in an obsession with metrics, but as Watts argues, there are always going to be an endless amount of contradicting statistics. This numeric obsession has made people view others as literal data rather than individuals in themselves. I would argue that this fascination with numbers in the United States is a modern form of Ogman's biopolitics and furthers this inability to distinguish natural beings from sovereign citizens. If everything is a statistic, there's ultimately going to be this desensitization from humanity. But, lest we not forget that underneath the superficiality of the world and the illusions of the self, we are all equal and we all deserve fundamental rights of man. As the Children's Defense Fund notes, 1 in 6 children in America lives with food insecurity, with Black and Hispanic children twice as likely not to have enough nutritious food to eat. At our borders around the country, we tear immigrants and refugee children from their parents and we put them in literal cages. And I think in such a divisive time in our country, it is crucial to speak up for children who have no voice or power in America. These are the immigrant children brought here with little to no control over their predicament. Because 1 in 4 children are immigrants, I really do think their voices should be heard because they are representative of the American population, whether people want them to or not. While immigrants are required to pay taxes regardless of their immigration status, millions of immigrants are still not receiving the same benefits that other citizens in the state receive, such as safety net programs and tax credits. These are programs that are implemented by the state to statistically improve the quality of life and lead to escaping poverty. So there are systems designed for people to succeed here. But, with the rise of the Trump administration, many immigrant mothers are too fearful of enrolling in these programs for which they're eligible, such as, nutrition and healthcare services, because they're worried that by signing up for this government assistance, that their families are going to be alerted to immigration authorities, risking the deportation of any undisclosed family members or friends. And every child is entitled to accessible and affordable healthcare. As the Children's Defense Fund states, children with healthcare coverage are more likely to receive preventative services they need, including immunizations, So they miss fewer days of school, and then they have a better educational outcome, and they obviously grow up to be more economically secure, and then they inevitably contribute to their communities. Because healthcare is such a beneficial institution, I find it extremely problematic that there is significant decrease in access to Medicaid, the Children's Health Insurance Program, and the Affordable Care Act for immigrant children. Moreover, it is not merely the confusion and lack of access to healthcare that troubles me, it's more so the blatant inhumane treatment of immigrant children, particularly at the border where they are locked in cage-like rooms, in prison-like conditions, being refused flu vaccines and medications despite a multitude of deaths. And I think especially given the recent spread of the coronavirus, people can see that having access to healthcare is a fundamental right. Not only are immigrant children denied healthcare and the ability to escape poverty in the United States, they're also denied legal justice as well. Migrant children are supposed to receive legal protection under the U.S. government. They are promised emergency shelters and legal representation. However, as the Amnesty International investigators discovered, the shelters holding 2,500 children were not as the Trump administration described them. The investigators found an impersonal, industrial, and highly restrictive setting where children must wear ID badges with barcodes, sleep in barrack-style housing, follow chalk lines when moving from place to place, and follow a strict schedule. It is repulsively inhumane to refuse children fundamental rights, but I really don't think that humans are inherently evil. We just must overcome this rise of modern biopolitics that stems from the desensitization from excessive information. Obsession with metrics and statistics coupled with this biopolitics lead to the inability for people to relate to and empathize with others over something as insignificant as conventional beliefs. Since the beginning of organized states, people in political power have imposed their political views onto natural beings, resulting in sovereign authority over people's natural bodies and lives. As Agamben notes in Biopower, in the system of the nation state, the so-called sacred and inalienable rights of man show themselves to lack every protection and reality at the moment in which they can no longer take form of rights belonging to the citizens of the state. There is this underlying concern in the relationship between the people and the nation. Because of the lack of distinction between the political and natural body, fundamental rights are just ignored based on someone's interminable subservience to their state. This denial of natural rights is reminiscent of the Trump administration's negative depiction of immigrants and the refusal to provide them with fundamental human rights. The Declaration of 1789 highlights the notion that people are unequivocally born and remain free and equal regardless of where they exist in the world. However, as Agamben notes, the very natural life that, inaugurating the biopolitics of modernity, is placed at the foundation of the order, varnishes into the figure of the citizen, in whom rights are preserved. On the one hand, there's this argument that man is created equal and we all reserve human rights, while there's also this notion that the city can pervade ownership of all. So these two contradicting ideas cannot exist harmoniously with one another. We cannot at the same time believe that every person deserves fundamental rights while also promoting this idea that immigrants are scum and, deserve to live in these prison-like conditions because of their political sovereignty. We must really recognize this distinction between a political subject and a man, and man as a whole. Birth is not synonymous with nation, and someone's rights as a human being should not be contingent on their citizenship. At the very moment in which native rights were declared to be inalienable and indefeasible, the rights of man in general were divided into active and passive rights. Namely, natural passive rights preserve society and humanity, whereas active political rights come from and regulate society itself. So all people, citizens or not, should be ensured of their natural rights. This is not to say that they should have the right to partake in or have an influence on political institutions, but every person does have these inalienable rights that the government should not be able to withhold. We really cannot deny someone access to healthcare, education, and basic shelter. Children should have legal representation despite their parents' decision to bring them here legally, because they are natural beings and they do deserve natural rights despite their citizenship status. How can we really turn a blind eye to someone seeking asylum in our country based on the pretense that their right to life is dependent on their place of birth? Political institutions cannot continue to permeate their power onto the naturalistic and fundamental freedoms of people. We really must stand up and defend the people who do not have a voice. We can protest immigration reform and vote for people who believe that immigrants deserve natural rights. It's really easy to look at people as a mere statistic in a sea of data, but still, tragedy can strike anyone and anywhere, and we're seeing that right now, making people so desperate enough to leave their homes and seek safety elsewhere. We must be willing to fight for people we don't know as much as we are eager to fight for ourselves.